Welcome to another episode of Explained by AI. What if prices just went crazy, skyrocketed, and all your savings, poof, just gone? We're diving into what a collapse of the U.S. dollar could look like.
Yeah, it's definitely something that a lot of folks are worried about. Central bankers, economists,
Yeah.
people like that, they're losing sleep over this. Yeah.
For decades, I mean, the dollar it's been king, right? It's been like the top dog, the world's reserve currency. Everything's been based around it. But there are some signs, right, that it's maybe not doing so hot, and the consequences could be really, really bad.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, think about how much the dollar is tied into everything, like the whole global financial system, right? So if it starts to go down, it could really mess things up in a big way.
Yeah. Big time. So, okay, let's look at some of the evidence, right? Is the dollar actually losing its grip? Is it really happening?
Well, I mean, if you look at the numbers, it's kind of scary. The dollar's share of global reserves, the money that central banks all over the world hold, it's fallen a lot, from something like 70% in the late 90s to under 60% today. That's a big drop.
Yeah, that's a huge drop. So
Yeah.
it sounds like central banks around the world they're diversifying, right? They're not putting all their eggs in the dollar basket anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, they're moving their money into, euros, the Chinese yuan, even gold.
Wow.
Which basically means they're not so sure about the dollar anymore.
Okay, so then what about all this debt that, we hear about all the time? America's national debt. Is that a problem?
Oh yeah, that's a big one. It's a huge I mean, the U.S. is over $33 trillion in debt.
Oh my gosh.
It's just a crazy amount, and it really makes people nervous, investors especially. They worry about whether the government can actually handle all that debt.
Right. It's like if a company has tons and tons of debt, eventually people are going to be like, are you ever going to pay us back?
Exactly. Yeah, and when people lose faith in the, in the country or in the whoever's issuing the currency, then the currency itself starts to look shaky.
Okay, so we've got the debt, but it's not just about that.
Right.
Right? There's also all this stuff going on in the world, like geopolitics.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The U.S., they've been using the dollar kind of as a weapon lately, with sanctions against certain countries like Russia, Iran.
Right. Trying to cut them off from the global system.
Exactly. Yeah. And it has had some effect, but it's also had some unintended consequences. It's basically pushed these countries and others too to look for other ways to do business, to get around the dollar.
Yeah.
They don't want to be, at the mercy of the U.S.
Well, it's kind of like a rebellion almost, right?
Yeah.
Countries are looking to break free from the dollar.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. They're promoting their own currencies, making new trade deals, and even experimenting with digital currencies, new ways to pay for things.
Like China, right?
Yeah.
With their yuan.
Exactly. Yeah, China is a big example of this. They've got the digital yuan now, and they're really pushing it. They want to create this whole other financial system that could, rival the dollar someday.
So we've got these challengers coming up, right? These other currencies that are trying to take the dollar's place. But what about inside the U.S.? Are there things happening here that could also, hurt the dollar?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the U.S. economy has its own problems right now,
Yeah.
Inflation is still really high, and that eats away at people's purchasing power, and it makes people lose confidence in the currency. And then you've got a Federal Reserve, they're raising interest rates like crazy to try to get inflation under control. But that could actually end up causing a recession, which would be bad news for the dollar.
Yeah, it's like a tough situation.
Yeah.
Right? They're trying to fix one problem,
Yeah.
but they might end up creating another one.
Exactly. It's a real balancing act.
So basically we've got this this perfect storm brewing, right? We've got the debt, we've got all this, stuff happening in the world with other countries, and then we've got problems inside the US, and all of this could end up knocking the dollar off its pedestal.
Yeah, it's a real possibility.
And what does that even mean? What happens if the dollar collapses? What does that look like for people?
Well, that's what we should talk about next, because the consequences could be pretty bad.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that. I think our listeners are probably pretty curious about what this means for them.
Yeah, for sure. Imagine you wake up one morning and all of a sudden all your savings, it's worth way less.
Yeah.
That's That's what could happen if the dollar, really tanks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a weaker dollar means like everything you buy, it's going to cost more, especially stuff that we import from other countries.
So like groceries would be more expensive, gas would be more expensive.
Exactly. Yeah, everything. Even things you might not think about, like, the parts that go into making your car or your phone, like all that stuff comes from somewhere else.
And if the dollar is weak, those things become more expensive for us to get here.
Right.
And that means companies have to raise prices.
Exactly. And then you get inflation and everybody's just paying more for everything.
So your paycheck might look the same, but it's not buying as much.
Exactly. Yeah, your money's not going as far.
And that's got to be really tough for people who are, maybe living paycheck to paycheck.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It would hit them the hardest for sure.
So it's not just about like everyday stuff, right? Like what about investments?
Yeah, investments could take a hit too, definitely. A falling dollar makes U.S. assets, things like stocks and bonds, less attractive to foreign investors.
So they might pull their money out.
Exactly, yeah. And that could lead to, like, a stock market crash.
Wow. And what about like housing?
Housing could be affected too, yeah, with interest rates going up and the economy maybe going into a recession. It'll be harder for people to buy homes.
So basically everything gets more expensive and people have less money to spend.
Yeah, pretty much.
That sounds like a recipe for real mess.
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
But it's not just about the economy, right? Like there's also what it means for America's place in the world.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The dollar being the world's reserve currency has given the U.S. a lot of power. It's like, we're the big dog on the block,
But if the dollar weakens,
Uh.
that could change.
It definitely could. Other countries like China, Russia, they're already trying to, chip away at the dollar's dominance.
And a weaker dollar would just make it easier for them.
Exactly. Yeah. And that could lead to a world where the U.S. is not as powerful as it used to be.
And maybe a world that's a little more unstable, too.
Yeah, potentially.
So if this is all happening, like, what can people do? Like, how do we prepare for this?
Well, one thing you can do is diversify your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket,
So, like, invest in things that aren't just tied to the U.S. dollar.
Right, yeah, like foreign stocks, commodities, precious metals, things like that.
So if the dollar goes down, maybe those things will go up.
Exactly, yeah. It's all about spreading the risk.
And it's probably good to have some cash on hand, too, right?
Yeah, for sure, just in case.
So we need to be, like, smart about our money.
Absolutely, yeah. Be informed, be prepared.
Okay, so we've talked about what could happen here in the U.S., but what about the rest of the world? Like, how would a world without the dollar, as the top dog, how would that even work?
We've got to think about how, like, the dollar being so powerful, it's really shaped, like, the whole world. It's like it's been the main currency for trade, the one that central banks all use. It's been like the foundation of the whole global financial system.
Yeah, for sure.
But like, what if that starts to change? What if the dollar like loses its shine?
Yeah, that's a big question.
It is, and it's something that like world leaders and policymakers they're really thinking about this because it's not just about like, people's wallets. It's about like global power, global stability, the whole thing.
Right.
I mean, for decades, the U.S. has been kind of like top dog, right?
Yeah.
Because of the dollar. It's given us a lot of influence, like in economics and politics, everywhere. We've been able to like shape international institutions, and even like project our military power more easily because of the dollar.
It's given us a real advantage.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But that advantage, you might not last forever,
Yeah.
especially if the dollar weakens. We're seeing this multipolar world starting to emerge where power is more spread out and other countries they're ready to like challenge the U.S.
Multipolar meaning like what? Like multiple like superpowers?
Exactly. Yeah. Like instead of just one main power, there's multiple centers of power. It's like imagine the world as a chessboard and there's all these new players making moves.
Okay, that's it.
And countries like China, Russia, they're leading the way in this. They've been like really strategic, building up their economies, making new alliances, and even setting up these alternative financial systems that don't even use the dollar.
So like if the dollar gets weaker, it just makes it easier for them to kind of take over.
Yeah, pretty much. It speeds up the whole process. And that could lead to a world that's a lot less stable, a lot more unpredictable. More conflicts, more trade wars, that kind of thing.
That sounds kind of scary.
Yeah, it's not a very pretty picture. The transition to this like multipolar world, it's probably not going to be smooth. It's probably going to be messy.
So, okay, so let's say like all this happens, the dollar weakens, other countries get more powerful. Like, what does that mean for just regular people? Like, how does that affect our lives?
Well, I mean, for one thing, it could really mess up global supply chains. Like, you know how everything is so interconnected these days?
Yeah.
Well, if things start going haywire in one part of the world, it can affect everyone. We could see, like, shortages of certain goods, prices going way up.
Right. Like everything just gets more expensive.
Exactly. And all this instability, it could also lead to, like, more military spending, more tension between countries, which, could eventually lead to conflict.
Wow. So it's like it's not just about the economy, it's about like everything.
Yeah, it's all connected.
So this has been a really, really interesting conversation. I think our listeners are probably walking away with a lot to think about.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's definitely a complex issue, but it's one that we all need to be aware of.
Absolutely.
So, do you have any topic that you would like to have explained? Drop it in the comments.